The morning alarm screamed through the halls of Galactic Military Academy like a wounded animal. Tommy Rivers rolled out of his tiny bunk and rubbed his eyes. At 10 years old, he was the smallest cadet in the entire station, but his mind worked differently than everyone else around him. While other students rushed to their combat training or tactical classes, Tommy always found himself drawn to the engineering decks. The academy floated in the darkness between three moons, a massive structure that housed over 50,000 cadets from hundreds of different worlds. Most students were at least 16 years old when they arrived. Tommy had been 8 when they let him in, after he fixed a broken transport ship that had been carrying him to Earth's local academy, the Alien. Mechanics had given up on the engine, but Tommy crawled inside and moved 3 wires. The ship hummed back to life, and word spread quickly about the strange human child who could talk to machines. Now, 2 years later, Tommy walked through corridors filled with beings twice his height. The Thurians moved on 4 legs and had skin, like gray stone. The Vectari looked like giant spiders, but were actually quite friendly once you got used to their clicking sounds. The Zilnari were tall and thin with 3 eyes, and they always seemed to be calculating something in their heads. Tommy had learned to understand all of them, but sometimes he felt very alone. The defense grid alarm was different from the morning wake-up call. This sound made Tommy's stomach twist with worry. He had heard this alarm only once before, during a practice drill, but this time faculty members were running in the hallways. Their faces showed real fear, not the calm control they usually maintained during exercises. Tommy found himself following the crowd toward the main command center. The huge room was filled with screens and control panels that reached up to the high ceiling. Normally, this place was quiet except for the soft humming of computers. Today, it was chaos. Alien voices mixed together in a dozen different languages, all sounding panicked. The defense grid protected the academy from attacks. It was a network of energy shields and weapon platforms that surrounded the station like an invisible bubble. Tommy had spent many hours watching the engineers work on it during maintenance periods. He liked to see how all the parts connected together, how energy flowed from one section to another like water through pipes. But now, something was very wrong. The main display screen showed red warnings everywhere. Sections of the grid were going dark one by one. Tommy squeezed between the legs of taller beings to get closer to the front of the room. He could see the problem clearly on the screens, even if the adults could not. Commander Bloth, a massive Thurian with 4 arms, was shouting orders to his staff. His translator device made his words sound like grinding metal. Sector 7 is completely offline. We are losing power to the outer rings. A thin Zilnari engineer waved her long fingers at another screen. The quantum processors are overheating. If we push them harder, they will burn out completely. Tommy watched the patterns on the screen. The failing sections were not random. They followed a specific path, like dominoes falling in a line. The adults were trying to fix each problem separately, but Tommy could see they were all connected. It was like trying to heal a cut by putting bandages on each drop of blood instead of closing the wound. The Academy's main computer spoke in its calm, mechanical voice. Warning! Defense grid failure in progress. Estimated time to complete system. Collapse, 43 minutes. Recommend immediate evacuation of all personnel. The room went quiet, except for the humming of machines. Then everyone started talking at once, even louder than before. Tommy heard words like impossible and hopeless in many different languages. Some of the younger cadets began to cry. The faculty members looked at each other with expressions Tommy had never seen before. They looked lost. But Tommy was not, looking at the faces around him. He was staring at the screens, seeing patterns that made perfect sense to his 10-year-old mind. The defense grid was not broken in the way the adults thought. It was like a puzzle that had been put together wrong, and all the pieces were trying to find their proper places. He thought about the time he had fixed his foster father's car back on Earth. The engine had been making terrible noises, and 3 Different mechanics had told them it needed to be completely replaced, but Tommy crawled underneath and listened to the sounds. He moved one loose bolt, and the engine became quiet and smooth again. Sometimes the biggest problems had the smallest solutions. Tommy took a deep breath and walked toward the main control console. His small feet made no sound on the metal floor. The adult beings around him were too busy arguing to notice one small human child approaching their most important equipment. Commander Bloth was saying something about requesting emergency support from the nearby fleet. A Vectari engineer was calculating how long it would take to evacuate everyone. A group of Zilnari faculty members were discussing whether they should surrender to whatever enemy was coming. Tommy reached the control console and looked up at its many buttons and switches. Most of them were too high for him to reach, but the manual override controls were lower down. They had been designed for emergency situations when regular computer systems might not work. Tommy had studied these controls during his free time, wondering what each one did. He cleared his throat and spoke in his small, clear voice. "Excuse me?" The arguing continued around him. Tommy tried again, a little louder. "Excuse me, Commander." Bloth looked down and noticed him for the first time. "Child, you should not be here. Return to your quarters immediately." Tommy did not move. Instead, he looked up at the giant Thurian commander with serious eyes. "I can fix it." The room became quiet again. Some of the adults made sounds that might have been laughter, but there was no joy in them. Commander Bloth's 4 eyes focused on Tommy with what looked like pity. "Little human, this is not a problem for children. Our greatest minds cannot solve this crisis." Tommy nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir, but I have been watching the defense grid for 2 years. I know how it works." The Academy's computer spoke again. "Warning! Defense grid failure in progress. Estimated time to complete system collapse, 38 minutes. Commander Bloth looked at the screens, then back at Tommy. Around them, other faculty members were shaking their heads or making dismissive gestures. But Tommy could see something changing in the commander's expression. Perhaps it was desperation. Or perhaps it was the tiny possibility that a child might see something that adults had missed. "What do you propose to do, young Rivers?" Tommy pointed at the main screen with its pattern of failing systems. "I need command access to the manual override controls, and I need everyone to do exactly what I tell them, even if it seems wrong." The room erupted in shocked voices. A child requesting command authority was unthinkable, but Commander Bloth raised one massive hand, and silence returned. "Computer, transfer emergency command authority to Cadet Tommy Rivers. Authorization Bloth 77 Alpha." The computer paused for a moment that felt like forever. "Authorization confirmed. Cadet Rivers now has full command access to defense grid systems." Tommy smiled for the first time that day and reached for the controls. The control panel came alive under Tommy's small hands like a musical instrument responding to a skilled player. Red warning lights covered every screen in the command center, but Tommy ignored them. Instead, he focused on the patterns flowing across the displays, watching how energy moved through the Academy's defense systems like blood through a body. His first order shocked everyone in the room. "Turn off the quantum processors." The silence that followed was so complete that Tommy could hear the soft humming of air recyclers in the walls. Chief Engineer Vorth, a tall Zilnari with 3 purple eyes, made a sound like static electricity. Her translator converted it into words of disbelief. "Child, the quantum processors are our most advanced technology. They coordinate the entire defense grid. Without them, we have no protection at all." Tommy kept his eyes on the screens while he spoke. "The processors are trying too hard. They are making the problem worse by fighting each other." Commander Bloth moved closer, his 4 heavy feet making the floor vibrate slightly. "Explain this reasoning, Cadet Rivers." Tom pointed to a section of the display where 2 green lines were crossing and creating sparks of red error codes. "Look here. Processor Unit 7 is trying to reroute power to Sector 12, but Processor Unit 12 is trying to send that. Same power, back to Sector 7. They are arguing with each other instead of working together. The adults around him exchanged glances that Tommy had learned to recognize. It was the look they gave each other when they thought he was being silly, but they were not quite sure enough to ignore him completely. Chief Engineer Vorth clicked her long fingers against her tablet. The quantum processors are designed to prevent exactly that kind of conflict. They use advanced algorithms to coordinate their activities. Tommy nodded politely. Yes, ma'am, but the algorithms are based on everything working normally. Right now, nothing is working normally, so the algorithms are confused. He turned back to the controls and began shutting down the quantum processors one by one. Each time a processor went offline, new alarms started ringing. The adult faces around him grew more worried, but Tommy continued his work with calm focus. Computer, show me manual control interface for defense grid sections 1 through 15. A new display appeared, covered with switches and dials that looked much simpler than the quantum processor controls. These were the backup systems, designed for situations when the fancy computers could not do their jobs. Most Academy engineers rarely used them because they required someone to make decisions instead of letting machines think automatically. Tommy began flipping switches with quick, confident movements. His hands were small enough to reach controls that adult beings would have needed special tools to operate. As he worked, he gave orders to the engineering teams scattered throughout the Academy. Team Alpha, I need you to go to Section 5, Level 12. There is a power coupling behind the third maintenance panel. It will be loose. Tighten it, but do not replace it. Through the communication system, Tommy heard the voice of Team Alpha leader, a Thurian engineer named Court. Cadet Rivers, that coupling was scheduled for replacement. Our protocols require us to install new components. Tommy paused in his work and spoke into the microphone with patient authority. Engineer Court, the old coupling is not broken. It is just tired. If you replace it with a new one, the new one will not know how to work with the old systems around it. They need to grow together slowly. There was a pause before Court responded. I do not understand this reasoning, but I will follow your orders. Tommy smiled and continued working. Adult beings always wanted to replace things that were not perfect. But Tommy had learned from fixing bicycles and toy robots that sometimes old parts worked better than new ones because they had learned how to fit together properly. His next order sent Team Beta to what seemed like an unimportant section of the Academy. While the defense grid was failing dramatically in the outer rings, Tommy wanted them to work on a power distribution center deep inside the station. Team Beta, go to Core Section 9. Look for the main power bus that feeds energy to the outer rings. You will see that it has 6 connections, but only 4 are being used. Connect the other 2. The team leader, a Vectari engineer whose name sounded like clicking sounds, responded with confusion. Cadet Rivers, those connections were deliberately left unused. The power load calculations show that using all 6 connections would create dangerous overloads. Tommy looked at the energy flow patterns on his screen. The calculations were correct for normal operations, but these were not normal operations. Engineer Tick, the calculations assume that all sections of the grid are working properly. Right. Now, sections 7, 11, and 14 are completely offline. That means the power that would normally go to them is backing up into the main system. If we spread that extra power across more connections, it will flow more smoothly. As the teams followed his instructions, Tommy continued shutting down automated systems throughout the Academy. Each time he turned off a piece of sophisticated technology, he replaced its function with something simpler and more direct. Instead of letting computers automatically balance power loads, he manually set the levels based on what he could see happening in real time. The other cadets in the command center watched him work with expressions ranging from amazement to worry. Most of them had been taught that more technology was always better than less technology. Seeing a 10-year-old human deliberately making their systems more primitive seemed wrong to them. But the screens were beginning to tell a different story. While the red warning lights still covered most displays, some sections were starting to show yellow caution signals instead of critical failure alerts. The defense grid was still broken, but it was no longer getting worse. Tommy wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at the main display. "Computer, show me power flow to outer ring sections." The display changed to show energy moving through the Academy's systems, like water flowing through a network of pipes. Tommy could see exactly where the flow was getting blocked or redirected incorrectly. It reminded him of the time he had helped his neighbor fix her garden irrigation system. The fancy automatic sprinkler controls had broken, but the water pressure was still good. They had replaced the electronic timers with simple mechanical valves, and the garden had grown better than ever. "Team Gamma, I need you to bypass the automatic load balancers in Section 18. Use the manual switches to direct power flow directly to the shield generators." This order caused the most concern among the adult engineers. Load balancers were safety devices that prevented power systems from becoming overloaded and exploding. Bypassing them was considered extremely dangerous. Chief, Engineer Vorth stepped closer to Tommy's position. "Cadet Rivers, removing the load balancers could result in catastrophic system failures. If too much power flows through the shield generators, they could overload and destroy themselves." Tommy looked up at her with serious eyes. "Ma'am, the load balancers are designed to protect the systems from too much power, but right now, the systems are dying from too little power. We need to choose between taking a small risk and accepting certain failure." He turned back to his controls and continued working. His small fingers moved across switches and dials with increasing speed and confidence. Around him, the adult beings watched in fascination as patterns began to emerge from what had seemed like random chaos. The Academy's computer announced an update. Defense grid power levels rising, system failure rate decreasing, estimated time to complete collapse now 72 minutes. For the first time since the crisis began, Tommy heard sounds of hope from the beings around him. They were still in danger, but at least the situation was not getting worse as quickly. Tommy allowed himself a small smile, but he knew the hardest part was still ahead. Stopping the collapse was only the first step. Now he had to figure out how to make the defense grid actually work again. Tommy crawled through Maintenance Tunnel 7 with his toolkit clanging against the metal walls behind him. The space was barely wide enough for his small body, designed for repair robots rather than living beings. Above him, he could hear the heavy footsteps of alien faculty members who were too large to follow him into these forgotten spaces of the Academy. The tunnel led to the heart of Section 12's power distribution system, a maze of cables and circuits that had been installed decades ago when the Academy was first built. Tommy had discovered this route during one of his unauthorized exploration trips, when he should have been in advanced mathematics class instead of learning how the station really worked. His flashlight beam revealed exactly what he had expected to find. The main power coupling was not broken or burned out. Instead, it was covered with a thin layer of dust and oxidation that prevented it from making a clean connection. The sophisticated diagnostic systems upstairs had declared it completely failed, but Tommy could see that it just needed someone to clean it properly. He pulled a small brush from his toolkit and began scrubbing the connection points. As he worked, he talked to the machinery in the soft voice he used with anything that seemed lonely or forgotten. "Nobody has visited you in a long time, has they?" he whispered to the coupling assembly. "The big computers probably just send error messages instead of coming down to see what you really need." Back in the command center, his voice came through the communication system as he reported his progress. "Commander Bloth, the coupling in Section 12 is not damaged. It was just dirty. I am cleaning it now." Through the speakers, he heard Chief Engineer Vorth respond with her usual skepticism. "Cadet Rivers, our diagnostic systems performed complete analysis of that coupling. It showed total failure on all connection points." Tommy paused in his cleaning to explain. "Ma'am, the diagnostic systems test the coupling by sending electrical signals through it. But the signals are very small and clean. They do not behave the same way as real power, which is bigger and noisier. A connection that works fine for test signals might not work for actual electricity. He finished cleaning the first connection, point and moved to the second. As he worked, he continued his explanation in the patient tone he had learned to use with adults who thought in more complicated ways than he did. It is like the difference between whispering and shouting. If someone has something in their ear that blocks sound, you might not hear their whisper, but you could still hear them shout. The diagnostic signals are like whispers. The real power is like shouting. Tommy heard sounds of discussion from the command center as the adult engineers considered his explanation. While they talked, he finished cleaning the coupling and began reconnecting the power leads. Each connection had to be tightened to exactly the right tension, tight enough to make good contact, but not so tight that it would crack under stress. This was the kind of work that humans were naturally good at, but most alien species found difficult. Tommy's hands could feel the subtle difference between a connection that was properly snug and one that was too loose or too tight. The Thurians were strong enough to crush the delicate connectors without meaning to. The Vectari had many arms, but lacked fine motor control in their finger-like appendages. The Zilnari were precise, but relied too much on measurements instead of touch. As Tommy worked, he thought about all the times he had helped his foster father fix things around their small apartment on Earth. They had never owned anything expensive, enough to require professional repair, so Tommy had learned to make old things work again instead of replacing them with new ones. Every machine had its own personality, its own way of asking for help when something was wrong. The Academy's defense grid was like a very large, very complicated machine that had been ignored for too long. The alien engineers were excellent at designing new systems and calculating optimal performance parameters, but they had forgotten how to listen to what their machines were actually trying to tell them. Tommy finished the reconnection work and began crawling toward his next destination. Tunnel 7 connected to Tunnel 12, which led to the primary power distribution hub for the outer defense ring. According to the Academy's blueprints, there was no maintenance access to that hub. But Tommy had discovered that the blueprints were wrong. The original builders had included a small access shaft that did not appear on any official diagram. As he crawled, his communication device crackled with updates from the engineering teams. They were reporting success in the areas where Tommy had sent them, but also confusion about why his simple fixes were working when sophisticated repairs had failed. Engineer Court's heavy voice came through the speakers. "Cadet Rivers, the power. Coupling in Section 5 is now operating normally, but I do not understand why tightening one loose connection restored power to the entire sector." Tommy smiled in the darkness of the tunnel. Engineer Court, electricity is lazy. It always wants to take the easiest path from one place to another. When one path becomes difficult, all the electricity tries to go through the other paths instead. That makes those paths work too hard, and they start to fail as well. By making the first path easy again, we let the electricity spread out properly. He reached the access shaft and began climbing upward. The shaft was so narrow that he had to keep his arms pressed against his sides, but his small size allowed him to move steadily toward the distribution hub. Behind him, he could hear the faint humming of machinery that was beginning to work properly again. The distribution hub was a room filled with thick cables and massive switching devices. Everything was covered with warning labels in multiple languages, explaining that unauthorized personnel should never enter this area. Tommy read the warnings carefully and decided that they probably did not apply to him, since he was currently the ranking commander of the defense grid. The problem here was more complex than simple dirt or loose connections. 3 main power feeds were supposed to supply energy to different sections of the outer defense ring, but Tommy could see that 2 of the feeds were trying to carry the load that should have been shared among all 3. The 3rd feed had been automatically disconnected when the crisis began, as a safety precaution to prevent overloads. The safety protocols made sense if you were trying to protect the equipment. But Tommy was more interested in protecting the people inside the academy. Sometimes you had to risk breaking a machine in order to save lives. He found the manual override controls for the disconnected power feed and began the process of bringing it back online. This was delicate work that required him to balance power loads in real time while the system was running. One mistake could cause explosions that would make the current crisis much worse. But Tommy had practiced this kind of balancing, many times using the electrical system in his dormitory building as a training ground. Late at night, when everyone else was sleeping, he would experiment with redistributing power loads to see how the building's systems responded. He had never caused any problems, and he had learned to feel the rhythm of electricity flowing through cables and circuits. As he worked, he continued talking to the machinery around him. "I know you are scared," he whispered to the switching devices. "You have been carrying too much weight for too long. But I am going to help you share the load properly now." The switches responded to his touch like old friends greeting each other. Power began flowing through the third feed again, and Tommy watched the status displays change from red warnings to yellow cautions. The defense grid was still not fully operational, but it was no longer in immediate danger of complete collapse. From the command center, he heard Commander Bloth's voice expressing amazement. "Cadet Rivers, outer ring power levels have increased by 40%. How did you accomplish this?" Tommy began climbing back down the access shaft, his work in the distribution hub complete. "Commander, the system was not broken. It was just scared. When machines get scared, they try to protect themselves by doing less work. But if you talk to them properly and show them that it is safe, they will go back to doing their jobs." As he crawled back through the maintenance tunnels toward his next destination, Tommy could hear the adults in the command center discussing his explanation. Some of them sounded confused by his simple language. Others seemed to be beginning to understand that human engineering was different from the technical approaches they had been taught. Tommy did not mind their confusion. He had more work to do, and the defense grid was still a long way from being completely repaired. But for the first time since the crisis began, he was confident that they were going to succeed. Emergency lights bathed the academy's corridors in pulsing red as Tommy emerged from the maintenance tunnels, covered in dust and grease but grinning with satisfaction. The defense grid was stabilizing, but new problems were appearing on the horizon. Long-range sensors had detected a fleet of unknown ships approaching the system, their intentions unclear but their timing extremely suspicious. In the command center, tension filled the air like electricity before a storm. The massive displays showed both good news and bad news in equal measure. Tommy's repairs had restored power to most sections of the defense grid, but the approaching ships would arrive long before conventional repair methods could bring the system to full operational status. Commander Bloth stood before the main tactical display, his forearms crossed in a gesture that Tommy had learned indicated serious concern. "Cadet Rivers, our long-range communications array has identified the approaching vessels. They belong to the Catherine Confederacy." Tommy climbed into the command chair that had been adjusted to accommodate his small size. The Catherines were not exactly enemies of the Academy, but they were known for testing the defenses of other civilizations. If they detected weakness, they would press their advantage to gain territory or resources. "How long before they arrive, Commander?" 67 minutes, replied Chief Engineer Vorth, her three eyes focused on the sensor readings. "Even if we could restore the quantum processors immediately, we would need at least 90 minutes to bring the defense grid to minimum operational standards." Tommy studied the tactical display with the same intense focus he brought to fixing broken machinery. The approaching Catherine fleet consisted of 12 ships, including several heavy cruisers that could pose a serious threat to the Academy. But Tommy was not looking at the ships themselves. Instead, he was examining the patterns of how the defense grid had been designed to respond to exactly this kind of situation. "Computer, show me the original defense grid specifications from when the Academy was first built." The display changed to show technical drawings that were 50 years old. Tommy compared them to the current system configuration, noting the differences that had accumulated over decades of upgrades and modifications. Each improvement had made the system more sophisticated, but also more fragile. "I see the problem," Tommy announced to the room. "Everyone has been trying to make the defense grid perfect, but perfect systems break easily when something goes wrong." He pointed to sections of the original design that had been replaced with newer technology. "Look here. The old system used simple electromagnetic barriers that could be powered directly from the Academy's main reactors, but they were replaced with quantum field generators that require computer coordination to function properly." Chief Engineer Vorth moved closer to examine the displays. "Cadet Rivers, the quantum field generators are far more efficient than the old electromagnetic systems. They provide better protection using less energy." Tommy nodded respectfully. "Yes, ma'am, when they work correctly. But when they break completely. The old electromagnetic systems were not as efficient, but they were much harder to break." He began calling up more technical displays, comparing power requirements and response times between the old and new systems. As he worked, an idea began forming in his mind. It was a crazy idea that would horrify the adult engineers, but it might be the only way to protect the Academy from the approaching fleet. "Computer, calculate power requirements to operate the defense grid using original electromagnetic barrier specifications, but powered by current reactor output levels." The computer processed the request for several seconds before responding. Electromagnetic barrier systems using current power levels would operate at approximately 230% of original design capacity. The room fell silent as the implications of this calculation became clear. The old-style systems, powered by the Academy's much more advanced modern reactors, would be far more powerful than anything the original designers had imagined possible. "Commander." Bloth made a sound like grinding stone, which Tommy had learned was how Thurians expressed amazement. "Cadet Rivers, are you proposing that we replace our entire defense grid with obsolete technology?" Tommy shook his head. "Not replace, Commander. We keep the new systems where they are working properly and add the old systems where the new ones have failed. It will be like having two different kinds of locks on the same door." He turned to address the engineering teams scattered throughout the Academy. "All teams, I need you to locate the original electromagnetic barrier generators. They should be in storage areas near your current positions. Most of them were never actually removed when the quantum systems were installed." This announcement caused considerable discussion among the adult engineers. Finding and reactivating 50-year-old equipment would normally require weeks of careful preparation and testing. Tommy was asking them to accomplish this task in less than an hour, with enemy ships approaching and no time for proper safety procedures. But the engineering teams had been watching Tommy's methods all day, and they were beginning to understand that human approaches to problem-solving were different from their own training. Instead of arguing about the impossibility of the task, they began searching for the old equipment. As the teams worked, Tommy continued his analysis of the defense grid's vulnerabilities. The quantum field generators were failing in a predictable pattern, always in sections where power fluctuations had exceeded their narrow operating tolerances. But electromagnetic barriers were much more tolerant of power variations. They would continue operating even under conditions that would destroy more delicate systems. "Team Alpha, I found the barrier generator for Section 7. It is behind the quantum field projector, connected to the same power feed. Do not disconnect the quantum system. Instead, connect the barrier generator to the secondary power coupling." Engineer Court's voice came through the communication system with a note of confusion. "Cadet Rivers, running both systems simultaneously will create interference patterns. Our training manuals specifically warn against operating different barrier technologies in the same location." Tommy smiled at the console. Adult engineers were always worried about interference patterns and compatibility issues. But Tommy had learned from fixing old radios that sometimes interference could be useful if you understood how to control it. Engineer Court, the interference patterns will make our defenses harder to predict. Enemy weapons are designed to penetrate barriers that behave in regular, predictable ways. If our barriers are constantly changing due to interference, enemy targeting systems will have difficulty locking onto them. As more teams reported success in locating and activating old barrier generators, the defense grid began displaying characteristics that confused everyone, including Tommy. The combination of old and new technologies was creating unexpected synergies. Electromagnetic barriers were providing power stabilization for quantum field generators, while quantum fields were focusing and amplifying the effectiveness of electromagnetic barriers. Chief Engineer Vorth studied the readings with growing amazement. Cadet Rivers, the combined system is operating at efficiency levels that should be theoretically impossible. Each technology is compensating for the weaknesses of the other. Tommy was not surprised by this result. He had seen similar effects when mixing old and new components in many of his repair projects. New technology was designed to be perfect under ideal conditions. Old technology was designed to keep working even when conditions were far from perfect. When you combined them properly, you got systems that were both powerful and reliable. The Academy's computer provided an update that brought smiles to faces throughout the command center. Defense grid now operating at 68% of nominal capacity. Rate of improvement increasing. Estimated time to full operational status, 41 minutes. Commander Bloth looked at the tactical display showing the approaching Catherine fleet, then at the defense grid status indicators that were steadily changing from red to green. Cadet Rivers, it appears that your unconventional methods may actually succeed. Tommy was already thinking ahead to the next challenge. Even if they restored the defense grid in time, the Catherines would expect to face standard Academy defensive systems. The mixed old and new configuration that Tommy was creating would behave differently from anything in their tactical databases. Commander, I think we should let the Catherines get close enough to scan our defenses before we power up to full strength. If they see what they expect to see, they will use standard attack patterns that our new configuration can handle easily. It was a risky strategy that depended on perfect timing, but Tommy was confident in his ability to bring the defense grid online exactly when needed. Around him, the adult beings were beginning to understand that human intuition could accomplish things that their most sophisticated planning could not achieve. The approaching enemy fleet would soon discover that the Academy's youngest cadet had given their defenses capabilities that no one had thought possible. The first Catherine probe missile struck the Academy's outer perimeter at exactly the moment Tommy had predicted. He watched the tactical display with calm focus, while adult beings around him held their breath in nervous anticipation. The hybrid defense grid responded to the attack in ways that surprised everyone, including Tommy himself. Instead of the clean, predictable barrier activation that Catherine tactical computers expected, the Academy's defenses flickered and pulsed with seemingly random patterns. The electromagnetic barriers created interference static that confused enemy sensors, while the quantum field generators provided focused protection exactly where it was needed most. The probe missile, designed to test conventional defensive systems, found itself facing technology that behaved like nothing in the Catherine database. Direct hit on outer barrier, reported Chief Engineer Vorth, her 3 eyes wide with amazement. But the barrier absorbed the entire impact without any measurable power drain. How is this possible? Tommy smiled as he watched energy readings flow across his displays like a river, finding the most efficient path to the sea. The old electromagnetic barriers are sharing the load with the quantum fields. When one system takes a hit, the other system automatically provides backup power. They are helping each other. Commander Bloth studied the tactical readouts with growing confidence. His 4 arms were no longer crossed in worry, but instead gestured toward the display with excitement that Tommy had rarely seen from the Sirius. Thurian Commander, the Catherine fleet is maintaining position at maximum sensor range. They appear to be analyzing our defensive response. Tommy had expected this reaction. The Catherines were known for their methodical approach to warfare. They would spend considerable time studying an enemy's capabilities before committing to a full attack. But Tommy's hybrid defense system was providing them with contradictory information that would be very difficult to analyze correctly. Computer, power down the quantum field generators in sections 4, 7, and 11. Leave the electromagnetic barriers running at full strength. This order caused immediate concern among the engineering staff. Chief Engineer Vorth stepped closer to Tommy's command position with an expression of confusion. Cadet Rivers, those sections will show as vulnerable on Kethrin sensors. They will concentrate their attack on those areas. Tommy nodded calmly. Yes, ma'am. That is exactly what I want them to do. He pointed to the power distribution displays that showed energy flowing from the deactivated quantum generators to strengthen the electromagnetic barriers in those same sections. The electromagnetic barriers in those sections are now running at 300% of normal power. They are actually stronger than before, but the Kethrins will not be able to detect this because their sensors are designed to recognize quantum field signatures, not electromagnetic ones. The Kethrin fleet began moving closer, their formation shifting to focus firepower on the sections that appeared weakest on their tactical displays. Tommy watched their approach with the same patient attention he gave to observing how electricity flowed through damaged circuits. Everything was proceeding exactly as he had hoped. All engineering teams, prepare for full system activation on. My command, when I give the signal, bring every generator online simultaneously, both old and new systems together. As the enemy ships moved into attack position, Tommy reflected on everything he had learned during this crisis. Adult beings from advanced civilizations had created incredibly sophisticated technology, but they had forgotten some of the simple principles that made technology reliable. They had focused so much on making their systems perfect that they had made them fragile. The Kethrin fleet opened fire with a coordinated barrage aimed at the seemingly vulnerable sections of the Academy's defenses. Dozens of energy weapons struck the barriers simultaneously, expecting to overwhelm the weakened defenses and create breaches for follow-up attacks. Instead, the electromagnetic barriers absorbed the incoming energy and converted it directly into additional power for the entire defense grid. The old-fashioned barrier technology, designed 50 years ago to be robust rather than efficient, proved capable of handling energy loads that would have destroyed more delicate modern systems. Now, Tommy commanded. All systems online. The Academy's defense grid came alive with power levels that exceeded every specification in the technical manuals. Quantum field generators that had been struggling to maintain basic function suddenly found themselves supported by electromagnetic barriers that provided both power stabilization and backup protection. The combined system created defensive capabilities that were far greater than the sum of their individual parts. The Kethrin attack fleet found themselves facing barriers that were not only stronger than expected, but were actively growing stronger as they absorbed the energy from incoming weapons. Fire. Their tactical computers, designed to predict the behavior of standard defensive systems, could not understand what they were seeing. Commander Bloth's voice filled the command center with triumph and amazement. Cadet Rivers, the defense grid, is now operating at 150% of rated capacity, and power levels are still rising. The enemy barrage is actually making our defenses stronger. Tommy allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before focusing on the next phase of his plan. Defending against the attack was only part of the solution. The Academy needed to send a clear message that would discourage future aggression without escalating the conflict into a full-scale war. Computer, target the Kethrin flagship with a focused energy pulse. Set power level to exactly match their strongest weapon, but do not fire until they cease their attack. This command demonstrated another aspect of human strategic thinking that impressed the alien faculty. Instead of overwhelming the enemy with superior firepower, Tommy was choosing to respond with precisely equal force. This approach would demonstrate the Academy's defensive capabilities without appearing unnecessarily aggressive. The Kethrin fleet quickly realized that their attack was not only failing, but was actually strengthening their target's defenses. Their weapons fire gradually decreased and then stopped entirely as their commanders tried to understand what had gone wrong with their carefully planned assault. Tommy waited exactly 30 seconds after the last enemy weapon fired before giving his next command. Fire energy pulse. A single beam of focused energy lanced out from the Academy's defense grid and struck the Kethran flagship's shields. The pulse was perfectly calibrated to match the power output of the enemy's heaviest weapons, sending a clear message about the Academy's capabilities without causing any actual damage. The effect on the Kethran fleet was immediate and dramatic. Within minutes, the enemy ships began withdrawing to a safe distance. Their sensors had detected energy readings that suggested the Academy possessed defensive and offensive capabilities far beyond what their intelligence reports had indicated. As the crisis ended and normal operations resumed throughout the Academy, Tommy found himself surrounded by alien engineers who wanted to understand exactly how his repairs had achieved such remarkable results. The questions came from all directions, in multiple languages, as beings who had spent decades studying advanced technology tried to comprehend the simple principles that a 10-year-old human had used to solve their most complex problems. Chief Engineer Vorth was the first to articulate what everyone was thinking. Cadet Rivers, our most sophisticated analysis systems declared the defense grid irreparable. Yet you restored it to better than new condition using methods that appear to violate several fundamental principles of engineering design. How did you know that your approach would work? Tommy thought carefully about how to explain his reasoning, in terms that adult minds could understand. Ma'am, I did not know that it would work, but I knew that the methods you were trying had already failed, so trying something different could not make the situation worse. He gestured toward the displays that showed the hybrid defense system operating smoothly at power levels no one had thought possible. Human engineering is different from what you learn in school. We do not try to make perfect systems. Instead, we try to make systems that keep working even when things go wrong. Commander Bloth approached Tommy's command position with an expression of deep respect. Cadet Rivers, the Academy Council has asked me to inform you that your actions today have earned you the highest honors we can bestow. You will be recognized as the youngest being ever to receive the Star of Galactic Service. Tommy smiled politely, but his attention was already shifting to other problems he had noticed during the crisis. Thank you, Commander. That is very nice. But I was wondering if I could skip the ceremony to work on the food dispensers in the dining hall. They have been making strange noises for weeks, and I think they just need someone to listen to what they are trying to say. The laughter that filled the command center was warm and genuine, expressing the affection and amazement that the entire Academy community felt for their youngest cadet. As news of the incident spread throughout the galaxy, other civilizations began to understand why humans had developed such a reputation for achieving impossible repairs under impossible conditions. Tommy Rivers had demonstrated that sometimes the most advanced technology could be improved by adding simpler, more reliable components. More importantly, he had shown that human intuition and willingness to try unconventional approaches could accomplish things that no amount of sophisticated analysis could achieve. The Academy's defense grid continued to operate at unprecedented efficiency levels for years afterward, becoming a model for other installations throughout the galaxy. And Tommy continued to fix things that other beings considered hopeless, always, approaching each problem with the simple question that had guided him through the crisis. What is this machine trying to tell me, and how can I help it do its job better?